For today's episode, I've gotten my hands on two different Kia K5 sedans. This is the midsize replacement for the Kia Optima, which has been on sale in the US for about 20 years. The main reason that they decided to go for the K5 name is that this is the same name that they've been using in Korea for some time. So now China, Saudi Arabia, the USA, Korea, and Canada are all going to be getting the same name on Kia's midsize sedan. This is an all-new vehicle, which is a little bit surprising because the previous generation Optima has only been on sale for 5 years. For 2021, there's some pretty big changes. We have an all-turbocharged engine lineup, so things will start out with a 1.6-liter turbo, and then later in the 2021 calendar year, we'll be getting a 2.5-liter turbocharged engine, producing nearly 300 horsepower. We also finally have the option of all-wheel drive. That's something that we don't see in the closely related Hyundai Sonata for some reason. I guess we should get the bad news out of the way up front. Neither of these models is all-wheel drive, and neither one has the 2.5-liter turbo. Also, the 2.5-liter turbo is not available with all-wheel drive for 2021. There doesn't really seem to be a technical reason why they couldn't put all-wheel drive on the 2.5-liter turbo. They just don't expect it to be a huge seller to begin with, and so adding all-wheel drive would add additional complexity and cost, so we just don't have that option unless everybody runs out and starts buying the 2.5-liter turbo, and of course the all-wheel drive 1.6-liter turbo version of the K5. We probably won't see all-wheel drive on that more powerful engine. The first thing you'll notice about the K5 versus the Optima that it replaces is that this certainly looks more aggressive. We also have a less defined grille up front. This tiger nose grille design, that's what they call the pinched in section right there at the front, extends all the way over here to the side of the vehicle, really accentuating the wideness of the K5, and the K5 is about 1 inch wider than the Optima that it replaces. We also have different headlamp modules. So this one has this 4-beam reflector style headlamp arrangement here, and then the GT line gets a 3-beam projector style. We don't have fog lamps over here in the EX, but we do have them over here in the GT line, but the looks are definitely very similar. It's just sort of a mild variation on the theme. The most distinctive feature up front has to be this LED turn signal, which also functions as an accent light when the turn signals are not on. They're calling this a heartbeat design, and you can really see that in the shape. Kia changes up the grille design based on the trim level that you're in, so we have a different grille over there on the GT line. Again, those fog lamps down there on the bottom of the bumper. And then moving over to the EX trim, you can see we don't have those fog lamps down there, different headlamps again. And then we have this grille design that looks sort of a little bit like perhaps plates that are stacked one on top of the other. Apparently nobody at Kia has read the news articles that say sedans are not in anymore and everybody's moving to crossovers, because arguably for 2021 we're going to be getting 3 entries in the mid-size sedan segment from Kia. And then of course there's the larger K900 and the smaller Kia Forte if you don't want something about this size. At 193.1 inches long, the K5 is sort of the middle child in the Kia mid-size sedan lineup, I guess you could say. This is 2 inches longer than the Kia Optima, about 3 inches longer than the Kia Stinger, but about 2 to 3 inches shorter than the Kia Cadenza. All 3 of these vehicles have very different personalities, however, and they're targeting very different shoppers. The Stinger is a little bit smaller than this, but it is definitely the most dynamic of the bunch. It's rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. It has a standard 2-liter turbo under the hood or an optional twin-turbo V6. Now those engines are probably going to change for 2021. We don't have official detail just yet. And the Cadenza, on the other hand, is designed to be a more luxurious alternative. You can see it as the competitor to the Avalon, the Lexus ES, perhaps an Acura TLX. It has a V6 engine under the hood, an 8-speed automatic transmission, front-wheel drive only, no all-wheel drive option, and a softer, more luxurious cabin. The Cadenza was recently refreshed to bring its design a little bit more in line with the K5 that I'm standing right next to. You'll really notice that in the rear and the front tail lamp modules. In a nutshell, if you want the more efficient option, that's going to be the K5. If you want the more refined option, that's going to be the Cadenza. And if you want the sportier option, that's going to be the Stinger. But interestingly enough, all 3 options are going to have very similar kinds of interior room. The Stinger is going to be the most cramped in the back seat, but the Cadenza doesn't really give us more interior room than we find in the K5. For 2021, we're going to be getting 3 different tire widths and of course a variety of different wheels depending on the trim level you get. If you get the lower end trims of the K5, then we get 205 width tires. If you get the GT line and the EX trim, the 2 ones that we're driving today, then we get 235 width tires. These are 235, 45 are 18s. And if you get the GT, which is coming later, then we'll get 245 width tires. But the tires themselves are an interesting touch here because these are Pirelli P0 all-season tires, which are a little bit grippier than the primacy tires that we find on the Accord 2.0T and the Camry V6. Interestingly, the Camry and the Accord use the exact same tire on those two models, and this one appears to be a little bit more aggressive. Moving around to the rear, again, we have variations on a theme. Both models have basically the same tail lamps. These are combination style modules, which means that the brake lights are LEDs, as is this accent strip that runs right there across the back, but the turn signals and the backup lights are incandescent bulbs, pretty much like we see in the competition in this segment as well. We do have some very slight differences to the treatments down here at the bottom of the bumper. This looks a little bit sportier over here in the GT line, and the exhaust tips get a little bit of a split right there in the middle. Now, neither of these vehicles have real exhaust tips on the rear bumper. Kia and Hyundai have hired an awful lot of Audi designers and other German designers, and the Germans seem to really love these faux exhaust tips, and that faux exhaust tip trend has certainly started to infect Kia. We see them on the K5 now and a number of other models, and I'm a little bit disappointed. I've always felt cheated by fake exhaust tips. I think they just shouldn't use them, or they should just give us real ones. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. On the other hand, the air diffuser right down here at the bottom of the bumper may be functional. It looks like it is, and it's basically the same design on the GT line and on the EX, but it's more prominent over here on the GT line because of its color. I think the most interesting design element on the new K5 has to be this chrome strip right here. It starts around the side view mirror and then wraps all the way around the vehicle to the other side view mirror. You'll also see it down there in the corner of your screen on the GT line, and it goes around the trunk lid. This has the effect of making the rear window look larger, but you'll see that this entire black section is on the trunk lid, and it is painted black in every version of the K5 because it's trying to accentuate that rear window design and really give this more of a lift back look or a fastback look, even though it is a traditional sedan. This is a bit of a closer look on the GT line trim. You can also see that we have that little black lip spoiler right there on the trunk lid. Although historically fuel economy hasn't exactly been Kia's forte, they've been working really hard to change that over the last few years. And that's why I'm surprised that they say that there is no current plan to bring us a K5 hybrid. I'm definitely surprised by that because clearly the Sonata's hybrid system would fit under this hood and would logically give the K5 50 miles per gallon in real-world driving. Instead, Kia is focusing on more of a performance audience with an all-turbocharged engine lineup. So the base engine is going to be what we're driving today. This is a 1.6-liter turbocharged four-cylinder engine producing 180 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque. The displacement may be familiar, but this is a new generation 1.6-liter turbo. It's focused a little bit more on fuel economy than before, and this one is now paired to an 8-speed automatic transmission, not a 7-speed dual clutch. A little bit later in the year, this engine is going to be joined by a new 2.5-liter turbocharged engine that will bump power up to 290 and torque up to 311. It's going to use an 8-speed transmission as well, but not the 8-speed automatic that we find in here. It's going to be using a new dual-clutch 8-speed automatic transmission, and it's going to send power to the front wheels only. Most of the K5s you'll find out on the dealer lot are going to give you 31 miles per gallon combined. That's for the 1.6-liter turbocharged engine, front-wheel drive, without auto start-stop. Interestingly enough, you'll only find auto start-stop on the absolute base LX trim. So if you get all the rest of the trims in the lineup, no auto start-stop. So if you want to avoid that particular feature, you can very easily do it in the K5 lineup. If you choose all-wheel drive, then that's going to drop fuel economy down to 29 miles per gallon. We're not sure what the fuel economy on the new 2.5-liter turbocharged engine is going to be, and remember, that one is not going to offer you all-wheel drive. I'm going to give front seat comfort 9 out of 10 points. If you're a taller driver, you may want to look at something like the K5, because the K5 and the Sonata have front seat tracks that move much further rearward than the average midsize sedan. You can see just how far away from the dashboard and steering wheel I am. At 6 feet tall, right now, my foot is probably, if I actually move my butt to the back of the seat there, it's probably about 5 inches away from the pedals. So you could very easily have much longer legs than I do and still be comfortable in the K5. We also have a little bit more headroom than in some of the competition. However, know that if you get the panoramic moonroof, then that does cut headroom down a little bit. One disappointment here is that we have just 2-way adjustable lumbar support, and the Optima had 4-way lumbar support. I'm not quite sure why Kia deleted that feature. Most likely it's because very few of the competition has 4-way adjustable lumbar, so they didn't really need it in order to compete. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion and 2-position seat memory over there on the driver's door. Although I'm definitely bummed by not having 4-way lumbar support for the driver, the passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. That's a really nice touch that we don't find in all the competition. It's a powered design with exactly the same range of motion and the 2-way lumbar support. Hopping into the back seat, we have an enormous amount of legroom. With this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I have about 7 or 8 inches of legroom left. When looking at legroom figures in sedans, it's important to remember to look at combined legroom figures, front row plus second row. Remember that these front seat tracks move an awful lot further rearward than some of the competition, and that has the effect of making the rear seat legroom numbers look a little bit smaller than some of the competition, but when you add them together, you'll really realize what's going on here. The Optima is a big sedan as far as interior volume goes. If I move over here to the middle seat, headroom is definitely limited because of this power moonroof and the fact that the rear bench is definitely bucket shaped. But if I go all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, I had a 6'5" passenger sitting very comfortably on this passenger side. I still have about 4 inches of legroom left. This is the kind of vehicle where if you need to put rear-facing child seats in the back, you should have absolutely no problem putting them back here with an adult sitting up front. Although the Honda Accord gives us a little bit more combined legroom, I have a little bit more usable headroom in the K5. So if I were to pick one of these vehicles based on me sitting in the back seat, it would be the K5 over the Camry or the Accord. Rear seat passengers get a padded center armrest with 2 cup holders. These are 60/40 folding rear seats, but the latches are back in the trunk. If we lift the trunk lid, we find what I would call more of a cargo slot because this is definitely more vertical than horizontal. This is one of the larger trunks in the midsize sedan segment at 16 cubic feet, and that really is obvious in our 24-inch roller bag test. Now, rather unfortunately, this is not as deep as I would like. It's really close. You could almost keep a 22-inch roller bag in this position, but as you can see, you just can't close the trunk lid. Now, in a nice touch, we do find a compact spare tire in every version of the K5, so if you want a spare, you'll still find it here. I'm a little surprised we don't have any cargo dividers around this spare tire, however, because it does appear to be a little bit of wasted space. The K5 surprised me by getting a 5 in our 24-inch roller bag test. That's because the cargo area is deep enough. If I pull that bag out, you can see we can squeeze one of those 24-inch roller bags right back there, and there's even a little bit of additional room for some smaller luggage on top. Unfortunately, Kia does not give us any handles on the trunk lid to help close it, so that does leave you to paw on the painted section of the trunk lid in order to close it. Let's take a quick look around the GT line's interior first. This is the sportier themed version of the K5. You can see that we have this large panoramic moonroof. It's a dual pane design and the front pane opens up. The rear pane doesn't go quite back there to the rear passengers' heads. It goes just about to above their laps. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts, and the GT line trim that we're driving has this red leather upholstery. There's a GT logo embroidered right there on the seat back, and we find more aggressive bolstering on the seat back and bottom cushions than we find in most of the competition. These seats are perforated, but in this particular trim, they're not ventilated. Moving over to the front door, we find a trim insert right there in the gray that sort of has a knurled metal appearance to it. It's all plastic trim in this vehicle. And we find different trim going on in here than we find in the EX. So this center section right here is a hard plastic. In the EX that we're going to look at in a bit, that's a soft plastic. We do have a soft touch armrest and then a very large bottle holder down there at the bottom of the door. One interesting feature in this interior is this sort of little fin here. It sort of looks like a bat ray with its wing or fin up right there. And we find that on all 4 doors right next to the window and door controls. It's a little bit easier to see this funny little wing over here on the driver's door. You can really see how it sticks up there. Moving back over to the dashboard, we find more of that same trim going on there. We have a soft touch upper section of the dashboard, hard plastics lower on the dashboard, just as you'd expect. The glove compartment is a bin style compartment. It's a little bit too small for some of those larger tablet computers. In the middle of the dashboard, we find one of 2 different infotainment systems. This is the smaller of the 2. This is an 8-inch touchscreen, and we have physical buttons alongside the screen. So if you're looking for a system without touch buttons, you might want to stick with this option. This supports wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto as well. Now, in kind of a weird twist, if you get the bigger LCD infotainment system, then we lose the wireless support for Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It's possible that that functionality may be given to the larger touchscreen at some point later in its life cycle. We just don't have any information on that right now. You notice the software is very familiar if you've used any of Hyundai or Kia's products lately. It's basically the same software that we've seen in a wide variety of their product line for some time. Below that, we have 2 large air vents, the engine start-stop button right there, the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control. Then below that, we have, if I move the shifter out of the way, 1 USB interface port. You can use that for wired Apple CarPlay if you would like to do that. Then there's a charge-only port next to it, 12-volt power port, large storage area there. We have a very similar shifter to what we find in the Stinger over here. 2 large cup holders right there. Moving back from there, we find the auto brake hold button, electric parking brake, and then a drive mode knob. This allows us to cycle between smart, normal, sport, and custom. You'll see the Qi wireless charger right there, but if I lift this up out of the way, One thing that I noticed is that although my phone would fit in there with the Apple case on it, it would not charge because it was just a little bit too far from that charging mat. This is an active ventilated Qi wireless charger, so if you're worried about your phone getting a little bit too hot in there, this is actively ventilated to help keep it cool. The center armrest is softly padded and leather wrapped. If we open that up, we find a moderately sized storage compartment, pretty similar to what we find in the competition. The instrument cluster is a variant of what we've seen in other Kia models before. We have a color multifunction display in the middle and then physical gauges for the speedometer and tachometer. The steering wheel in the GT line is a flat bottom 3-spoke steering wheel, no paddle shifters on the back, but we do have sport grips up top. There is a manual transmission mode if you move the shifter over to the left, and then you can toggle forward and backward for the manual mode. This model has the optional radar adaptive cruise control, so we have those buttons over here on the right side. This is the highway driving assist that's more aggressive lane centering. This button and this toggle relate to that multifunction display between the speedometer and tachometer, and then we have the infotainment buttons over here on the left side of the wheel. One thing that Kia does a little bit better than most of the competition is bringing nicer touches into the more expensive trims. So for instance, we're in an EX trim, and this center door insert right there becomes a soft touch material that is after stitched, and the lower section of the dashboard right here above the same glove compartment also becomes a softer touch material. The rear door panels look very similar to the front door panels, but instead of the soft touch plastics on top, we have hard plastics up here. We have the same imitation wood trim, the soft touch materials going on here with the after stitching there, and then a soft touch armrest on the door. The soft touch materials on the rear doors are also an upgrade over the lower end trims. Moving back over to the dashboard, we find a large amount of really believable imitation wood trim. This is something that Kia started doing really well in the Telluride, and that's translated over here into the K5 as well. It has the appearance and the texture of open pore wood. In the middle of the dashboard, we find the larger touchscreen infotainment system. This still supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but for some reason it doesn't support them wirelessly, and I do think that's a weird twist. We have touch buttons over here for the main features: map, navigation, the favorite button there that will take us back to that projection interface. Again, the other key difference is that vehicle settings are done right here in this screen rather than in the multifunction display. Over here we have the dual zone climate controls, basically the same controls we saw before. That's where we plug in our phone for Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. Same cup holders down there. The only real difference is down here around the drive mode selector, where we get the heated steering wheel button and then the toggles for the heated and the ventilated seats. The steering wheel loses its flat bottom, but the rest of the design is exactly the same. And the instrument cluster is identical, with the exception, of course, that we don't have vehicle settings right there in this little display. In our testing, this model ran 0 to 60 in 7.3 seconds. That's definitely a respectable 0 to 60 time. It takes 7.6 seconds for the Camry to do the same, and 7.5 for an Accord with the 1.5 turbo. Versus the Accord with the 1.5 turbo, you'll notice that this engine definitely produces more low-end torque. And we also have some slightly different gearing going on in this versus the CVT that we find in the Accord. So if you're at a stop, you can get a little bit of one-wheel peel in this, which is kind of entertaining. And we don't see that same sort of thing in the Accord. This engine also has a slightly gruffer, slightly beefier sound to it than the 1.5-liter turbo we find in the Accord, but it doesn't come across quite as refined as the 4-cylinder engine that we find in the Camry. Oddly enough, this Kia 8-speed automatic, which is an in-house design, feels a little bit more like a dual-clutch transmission, and I think that's all down to software programming, because we get a very similar feel in the Volkswagen Passat, even though, oddly enough, the Passat and the Camry use basically the same 8-speed. That's not the 8-speed that we find under here. This is an in-house design. Those two transmissions in the Camry and in the Passat were designed by Aisin, which is Toyota's captive transmission company, effectively. In our 60-0 braking score, the K5 did incredibly well thanks to the wide, low-profile, grippy tires that we have on here. Again, Pirelli P0 tires on this particular model. We also find those on the GT line. That's how this model went 60-0 in 106 feet. That is very, very short. When we take a look at the competition, we don't generally find tires this wide at this price point. You will find 225 with tires on the Mazda 6, on the Camry, and on the Accord, generally speaking, in this price range. Now, the Accord does give us wider tires if you get the 2.0T, and we get wider tires in the Camry with the V6, but those models would be competitors to the K5 GT, and that will get wider tires than them, 245 with tires. Curb weight is also substantially similar. This will come in at about 3,100 pounds for the absolute base version, 3,220 pounds for the model that we're driving here. That is almost exactly the curb weight of the Accord 1.5T, which is definitely saying something because the Accord is really light. Light curb weight not only helps acceleration and braking, but it also helps improve handling. And handling is certainly something that Kia has dialed in with the K5. The Hyundai Kia Motor Group have been hiring a number of German engineers away from acclaimed German brands, and that's really obvious when you take a look at how this vehicle drives. This feels an awful lot like the Honda Accord. I would say perhaps even a little bit like a BMW 2 Series Grand Coupe. The steering is sharp, the steering is quick, and the grip levels are definitely very, very good. We have a little bit more body roll, just as you'd expect in a mid-size sedan versus a more performance-oriented luxury sedan, but this holds the road incredibly well. A lot of that does have to do with the tires, of course. Now, I suspect if we put identical tires on this and on the Camry and on the Accord, that the Accord might do a little bit better. I think that the Accord has a slight, very, very slight advantage when it comes to precision, when it comes to the feel of the steering rack, but the K5, honestly, I think this is better than the Camry, and that's really saying something because the Camry got incredibly good in this last generation. The Mazda 6 definitely gives us a little bit more feedback in the steering, but it's not going to be as fast as this, and it's not going to hold the road as well as this. Grip levels are definitely better here. Now, I don't have access to a skid pad, and unfortunately, nobody that I know that has access to a skid pad has tested this one yet, but I suspect this is going to pull more horizontal Gs than pretty much any of the other mainstream entries. Remember that even when we're talking about the Accord 2.0T or the Camry V6 in those top trims, those use Michelin Primacy MX4 tires, and those are more of an efficiency-oriented tire. They're not really targeting grip, and this tire definitely has more grip in mind. I also wouldn't be surprised if we saw a summer tire package available in the K5 because we see that in the Kia Forte, and that would really fit the characteristics of this vehicle incredibly well. This is the kind of car that you could definitely put grippier tires on, and the chassis tuning, everything about this is ready for those grippier tires. And of course, we're also going to see wider tires in the GT. So when it comes to handling, I'm absolutely going to give this an A+. Out on a rougher road, I'm going to give ride quality an A-. Remember that we do have lower profile tires in this EX trim and in the GT line trim than we would find in generally comparably equipped Accord or Camry models. Kia also decided to go slightly on the sporty side of the segment when it came to suspension tune, so this is going to be a little bit firmer than those mainline options. But because the K5 is not designed to be a sports sedan necessarily, it's not like this is going to be rock hard. It's not firm, but you will notice the difference between the lower profile and higher profile tires in this segment. We get a little bit less cushion going on here. In our cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, we got 71 decibels in here, making this one of the quieter options. This is very similar to the Camry V6 that we last tested, and a little bit quieter than the Camry Hybrid, which did surprise me a bit. All K5 models get a standard acoustic laminated windshield, and that definitely helps out the wind noise, but road noise is better controlled in here than I thought it would be, especially considering that we have wider tires than some of the competition, and that would generally mean a little bit more road noise in the cabin, but it's pretty well controlled here, and very, very similar to the top-end versions of the Camry and the Accord. I wouldn't be surprised if the lower end trims of this were a little bit quieter because they have some of the same sound deadening, but they do have narrower 205 width tires. And just going back to handling really quickly for a moment, that is important to keep in mind because the base tires on the K5 are going to be a little bit skinnier than some of the options out there, 205 width tires for LX and LXS. And then when we jump up into the next trim levels, all of a sudden they get really wide, 235 width tires, and then they get wider from there on the top end GT. So there's no middle ground where we get 215 and then 225 width tires like we find in some of the competition. Kia just sort of makes this massive leap. Despite the wider and grippier tires, fuel economy has been pretty impressive. I've put about 120 miles on this EX trim, about 100 miles on the GT line trim over a day. We've only had these cars for about 24 hours so far, and they're going back very, very soon here. But we've been averaging 31.5 miles per gallon, and that includes the 0 to 60 testing, the 60 to 0 testing, and climbing up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass. Perhaps a little bit more impressive than that is the fact that when driving this EX trim on my fuel economy test loop, I was averaging 34.5 miles per gallon. That's a very, very good fuel economy score, very in keeping with the 1.5-liter turbo in the Accord, which I think has some of the best fuel economy in this segment. Now, the reason I'm going to give fuel economy a B+ here, of course, is that we do have hybrids in this segment. We have the hybrid Accord, the hybrid Camry, and the hybrid Sonata. All three of those, when driven gently, will give you about 50 miles per gallon, but fuel economy is, generally speaking, going to be best in the Camry and in the Sonata. Bottom line, out on the road, the K5 is certainly a lot of fun, and this is definitely a significant improvement over the outgoing Optima. It's not that the Optima was sloppy in any way out on the road. It had a good feel to it, but you had to constantly remind yourself that you paid a little bit less for it than the Accord or the Camry, and that's not going on with the K5. As I've come to expect from Kia, they have priced the K5 pretty aggressively. When we're talking about pricing comparisons, remember that I don't have pricing yet for the 2021 Camry or the 2021 Accord. So the pricing that we're going to be talking about here is 2020 versus 2021. And generally speaking, things are going in an upward direction, so expect the 2021 Camry and Accord to be a little bit more expensive. The base model K5 is going to be $23,490. That's going to get you the LX trim, front-wheel drive, the best fuel economy, the 8-speed infotainment system that we saw in one of these models right here, and auto start-stop. If you want all-wheel drive, you'll need to step up to the LXS trim and then select that option box. That will set you back $26,590. And if you want the 2.5-liter turbocharged engine under the hood, that's going to be at least $30,490, going on up to about $34,500 before tax, title, license, or destination. Any way you slice it, however, the K5 is going to be about $1,000 less than a comparably equipped Camry or Accord. I was really surprised by that because this guy starts out $1,000 less than the Camry and stays about $1,000 less all the way on up the line. Now the feature set is going to be a little bit different on some of these comparisons. So for instance, the base K5 model is not going to give us radar adaptive cruise control, which we do find in every trim of the Camry. I really love that particular feature, but the K5 is going to give us a longer standard powertrain warranty and a few features that we don't find standard on the Camry. Bear in mind that when comparing vehicles, we don't find exactly the same features in the base trims. So the biggest omission here in the K5 is that we don't get radar adaptive cruise control, for instance, like we do find in the Camry. But even when you've adjusted for base feature content, the K5 is still going to be an excellent deal. It's still going to be about $1,000 less than the Camry because we do find a few features in this that we don't find in base model Camrys or Accords. It's amazing how far Kia has come in so short a time. The Optima proved that Kia is capable of building reliable, handsome family sedans with a strong emphasis on their value proposition. But they're going in a little bit of a different direction with the K5, because the Optima was never where the Camry or the Accord were in terms of performance or in terms of driving dynamics. But things are quite different with the K5. This is definitely right in there with the Camry and the Accord in terms of driving fun out on the road. And in terms of performance, we get a very respectable 0 to 60 time with the base 1.6-liter turbo. And although we haven't 0 to 60 tested the 2.5-liter turbo, I was able to do some quick estimates on the Sonata that uses the same 2.5-liter turbo, and it should be right in there with the Camry V6 and the Accord 2.0T. But in an interesting twist, rather than simply matching the competition, I think Kia has done an excellent job of outgunning the competition in some ways. I was really surprised by the tire choice on this EX trim. Again, we get 235 with Pirelli tires on this EX trim and on the GT line trim next to me as well. Although I think the Accord has a very, very slight edge over the K5 in terms of the steering precision and steering feel out on the road, it doesn't really have anything over the K5 in terms of grip and in terms of suspension refinement. So the K5 really is exactly where this segment wants to be. And more importantly, Kia has not lost sight of their value proposition. So this is still going to be notably less expensive than the competition, while also delivering you excellent reliability. And if you're not interested in a continuously variable transmission, this is going to be one of the few entries that still does not have a CVT. Or if you're interested in a dual clutch transmission for their quick shifting behavior, there's going to be one available in the K5 a little bit later. Now, unfortunately, still no all-wheel drive with that GT engine. I know I'm harping on that a lot, but I really am a little bit disappointed. The only high horsepower option in this particular segment with all-wheel drive is going to be the Subaru Legacy. But the Subaru Legacy is also a different kind of vehicle. It's a little bit softer than this. It's not going to feel as precise as the K5. It definitely has a lot of thrust, but it also has a continuously variable transmission. Of course, if I were a betting man, I might say that the logical reason for not giving the K5 GT all-wheel drive is the fact that there is a Kia Stinger. So if you're looking in this segment and you're really interested in performance, you're interested in better acceleration, more dynamic drive experience, etc., there's the Kia Stinger. And oddly enough, if you're looking for a V6 because you say, well, the Camry has a V6 and I really want a V6 rather than a turbocharged engine, there's a Kia Cadenza for that. And perhaps even stranger still, if you're saying to yourself, you know what, I really like this, but I want something that's a little bit bigger and I want a twin-turbo V6 engine under the hood and all-wheel drive, then there's a Kia K900 for that. Be sure to let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and stay tuned because hopefully I will get my hands on the 2.5-liter turbo just as soon as I possibly can, and hopefully we'll also get one of these back here for a complete weekly review so we can dive through our usual pricing and comparison sections. I really decided to shorten this video as much as possible so I could get it out to you as quickly as possible because these are on Kia dealer lots right now. So if you want a K5, go ahead and get one. They're on sale today. I'll see all of you later.